everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Brewing with 50 Bucks. My name is Stefan. I'm coming to you from General Warfare headquarters. Now, we have a brand new deck tech for you this week, and not only is it a monocolor deck, it's mono white. Yes, the hardest decks to build, considering there's a very little support with this. We're trying it out today. It's mono white, and this is also a commander that has very rare play. This is one that you can barely even find on any meta, let alone any like recurring commander table. There's only 16 decks of these made. Now number 17, today's deck is Hixus Prison Warden. So the reason why I built this deck today is because I wanted to follow up on last week's video of my top 5 underrated deck themes. Link in the top right of your video right now. And basically, since Prison doesn't even have its own theme on EDHREC, I went ahead and tried to do this on my own and try to figure out a little deck idea to make for this guy. Since I had a general idea with him before, decided, you know what, let's go full force with him. And without further ado, let's get straight into our commander, shall we? All right, so Hixus is a 4/4 for 3 white legendary human soldier with Flash. Flash means you can play the spell at any time you can play an instant. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, if Hixus Prison Warden enters the battlefield this turn, exile that creature until Hixus leaves the battlefield. So the entire strategy of this deck is to lock out your opponents by playing prison style spells, board wipes, and win with Approach of the Second Sun. And by prison style cards, I mean cards that make other cards leave the battlefield, either exiled or put under the cards until they leave the battlefield. Hence, Hixus Prison Warden. So we are going to be going through today's video with that in mind. And don't forget, each one of these decks has a $50 budget attached to them. The budget includes the commander's price, it excludes the prices of basic lands, and there is a $5 leniency because most of the time you can go over and expend $5 extra for some notable upgrades, but we're trying to keep this within a $50 budget. Now, we have 7 categories to go through, and we're going to start off with our prison style cards. We have 13 of them, and we're going to start off with Angel of Sanctions. This is a 3/4 for 3 white angel with flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Angel of Sanctions leaves the battlefield. So anytime you can cast Angel of Sanctions, it has the same converted mana cost as Hixus. However, if you don't want to play Hixus that turn, or if you already have a target in mind for the removal, you can always play Angel of Sanctions and get rid of a target non-land permanent your opponent controls. Best of all, it has Embalm for 5 and white. You can exile this card with your graveyard. You create a token of it as a copy of the angel, except it's a white zombie angel with no mana cost. And basically you can only embalm on your turn. With this, you get to get a secondary trigger off the angel itself when it comes back on the field with its embalm. Next is Banisher Priest. It is a straightforward card for 2/2 white and 1. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile a target creature an opponent controls until Banisher Priest leaves the battlefield. Pretty straightforward. Basically, you exile a creature an opponent controls until the priest leaves the battlefield. Next, we're running Banishing Light. And it's the exact same thing. You exile a target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. The limitation for Banisher Priest was it only hits a creature with Banishing Light. Since it's an enchantment, it hits target non-land permanents as well. Next, we're running Cast Out. For 1 extra mana with Flash, whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And with this, it has Cycling for white. So you get to discard this card and draw an extra card on your turn if you don't need Cast Out. I like cycling. If you've seen my previous videos, you know how much I like cycling cards, and this is no exception to that rule. Next, we're running Fairgrounds Warden, which is the exact same thing as Banisher Priest, except instead of paying the extra white, it's 2 generic and 1 white mana for a 1/3. Whenever it enters the battlefield, exile target creature and opponent controls until the Warden leaves the battlefield. Next, we're running Fiend Hunter, which is the same as Banisher Priest. You exile another target creature until Fiend Hunter leaves the battlefield. battlefield. Next, we are running Martial Law. For 2 white for enchantment, at the beginning of your upkeep, you detain target creature an opponent controls. What detain means is until your next turn, that creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. This is not exactly prison style, this is just a flavor win regarding the fact you're passing laws within your deck and the fact you can make your opponents not be able to use their activated abilities or attack you or even block your creatures. Flavor win. Next is Oblivion Ring. It's probably the best prison card since whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile another target non-land permanent. When it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's the same thing as Fiend Hunter, as you noticed. However, the ruling on this is much different than Banisher Priest or Banishing Light or Cast Out, any of that. So how Fiend Hunter and Oblivion Ring work is when either the Fiend Hunter or the Ring leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Whereas Banishing Light and Banishing Priest is exile that creature or non-land permanent until Banisher Priest leaves the battlefield. So basically you can stack triggers with Oblivion Ring and Fiend Hunter. These are main combo pieces. There is no notable combo in this deck that takes advantage of Fiend Hunter or Oblivion Ring since it would be out of budget for us to take full advantage of it. Next, we're running Prison Realm. This is a card from War of the Spark. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you exile a target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Prison Realm leaves the battlefield. And whenever it enters, you get to scry 1. Next is Prison Term, where you get to enchant a creature. It can't attack or block. Its activated abilities can't be activated. So it is so it is permanently detained. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under opponent's control, you can attach Prison Term to that creature instead. So you can flip-flop between creatures whenever they come into play. Whatever is the biggest threat to you at that point, you can always put Prison Term on the creature that came into play. Next, we're running Quarantine Field. Now, Quarantine Field allows you to exile up multiple non-land permanents. It is much more of a higher cost since it has 2 X's in its cost itself. So you are going to be putting X isolation counters and you get to exile up to 1 target non-land permanent for each one of those isolation counters. Next, we're running Seal Away. This also has flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to exile target tapped creature an opponent controls until Seal Away leaves the battlefield. With this ability, you can have one of your opponents attack you for lethal, and before blocks, you can just flash in Seal Away, exile it, and that way you will not only not die, but you'll also get rid of a major threat your opponent controls. And lastly, we're running Stasis Snare. This also has flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield, exile target creature and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. The exact same thing as Seal Away, except for 1 extra white mana. Next, we're going to be going over our board wipes. In the event of your opponents getting more advantage than you get to clear the board at any point in time that you have. Starting off, we have Cleansing Nova. It's for 3 white, you get to destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. For the most part, if you have a monopoly of creatures, you get to just destroy artifacts and enchantments. Or if you have a monopoly on artifacts, or in this case enchantments, because most of our prison style effects are enchantments, destroy all creatures is also very good. Next, we're running Doomskar. You get to destroy all creatures. For 3 white, it's still a little high costed in my personal opinion, but for Foretell, you basically have a little cantrip attached to this. Now, I've had a little discussion with a couple of my friends with Foretell. Now, with Foretell, you need more cards to justify having Foretell in the deck because once you reveal it in like the first playthrough, you're going to be there. Everyone's going to catch on immediately what the card is going to be if you are only running 1 of that card. Now for this, we are running 1 more Foretell card. However, I will be revealing that in the not too distant future. Next, we're running Hour of Revelation. This looks like a very high costed card. However, you're mostly gonna be playing this for the 3 white mana since a lot of times in Commander, you're gonna be having more than 10 non-land permanents on the battlefield, not just under one person's control, but all together. Destroy all non-land permanents. A clear reset for the board. Next, we're running a Martial Coup. Basically, you get to create X/1/1 white soldier creatures. If X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. easily you can clear out the board and give yourself some more soldier tokens to threaten other people's boards. Next, we're running Mass Calcify. For 7 mana, you destroy all non-white creatures. All of our creatures, if you haven't noticed, since this is a mono-white deck, are white, so you can effectively clear the board, bar somebody not having white creatures on their side of the field. Next, we're running Phyrexian Rebirth. Destroy all creatures, then create an excess colorless horror artifact creature token, where X is the number of creatures destroyed this way. Clear the board with creatures, and you get your own creature in tow. Next, we're running Play of the Game. Now, this is a big card. It looks like much, but you can also convince your opponents to pay into this as well if they don't like what's going on the board. You can have somebody help you out by paying half of it, where you're paying only 5, they pay 3. That way, you get to exile all non-land permanents instead. And since it's exile, they're forever gone. And the last one is Rout. This can be an instant speed destroy all creatures, basically for 2 extra mana. So at any point in time you feel threatened by somebody's board, at any point in time for 2 extra mana, you can just board wipe and be clear of the board. Next, we're going to be running our removal spells. So we're going to start off very quickly with Break Ties. This is one of the new cards coming out of Modern Horizons 2. With this one, you get to destroy either target artifact, target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard with Reinforce 1 for a white mana. You get to discard this card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Now, Break Ties is effectively the same as Return to Nature. However, it's in white and for 1 extra mana. But that being said, this is still a really good card. You get to spot removal or exile a card from somebody's graveyard. Target it, you could just... Next, we have both Containment Priest and Hallowed Moonlight. Now, this may be jarring since this is not conventional removal. However, until end of turn, if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, you exile it. Same as Containment Priest with Flash, if a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, you exile it instead. So let's just say somebody has a card that allows them to get 80 tokens. Hypothetical number, 80 tokens. And basically they're not paying for those creatures to come into play. You pay 2 mana, Containment Priest, they're all gone. They're all exiled. Same thing with Hallowed Moonlight, except with Hallowed Moonlight, you get to draw a card as well with that card. Next, we're running Crypt Swap. Exile target creature, its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. This is basically the replacement for Swords of Plowshare and Path to Exile, since those are a little bit more out of budget. It's more of a budget card, basically, since it costs a little bit more than Path or Swords does, except you still get to exile a creature nonetheless, and you get to give your opponent something in return. Either with Swords, it was life, Path was a land, and this one is a colorless shapeshifter. Next, we're running Crush Contraband. This is starting to become a pet card in my decks. This is just a really good card to have around. You get to just either exile an artifact or an enchantment, or both, depending on what your needs are at the time, for 4 mana. Next, we're running Forsake the Worldly. For 2 and a white, exile target artifact or enchantment, and you get to cycle it for 2 mana as well. Next, we're running Generous Gift. This also is a pet card of mine, but this is just a clear staple card in white decks. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature. It's white Beast Within, except this is elephants instead of beasts. Next, we're running Heliod's Intervention. For X white, you choose either destroy X target artifacts or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. For the most part, with this card, you're going to be wiping a lot of the artifacts and enchantments, hence the reason why I put this in removal, but you also have that instance to gain extra life in the event you're at a low enough life and somebody's threatening to kill you. Basically, you play Heliod's Intervention in response, and you get to get twice the amount of life back, and you don't get to die that turn. And lastly, we're running Unexpectedly Absent. For X white, same casting cost as Heliod's Intervention. You have to put target non-land permanent into its owner's library just beneath the top X cards of the library. Basically, it's not a conventional removal like I mentioned with Hallowed Moonlight and Containment Priest. However, you get to still put a card back in their deck. That way it's not in their graveyard, it's not back in their hand, it's not on the top of the deck, it's somewhere in the deck itself. Next, we're gonna be running through our 4 recursion cards. So we're gonna start very strongly off with Brought Back. You get to choose up to 2 target permanents cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. You return them to the battlefield tapped. Effectively, if someone board wipes, or if you even board wipe and you want to get 2 things on your side of the field that were wiped at the time back, basically you get to do so with Brought Back. Next, we're running Meteorious Shepherd for 7 mana with flying. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If that land is a plains, you may return that non-land permanent to the battlefield instead. In this deck, there is a surplus of not only plains but lands in this deck, so Meteorious Shepherd's trigger is easily going to be going off. Next, we're going to be talking about Hall of Heliod's Generosity. We usually leave lands for the end of the video. However, with Hall, you get to tap 1 and a white and put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library. This includes all of the prison style cards that I've mentioned to you before, and other cards that we'll be mentioning to you right after this category. However, this is a very strong land. This is also the most expensive card in our deck, rounding off at around $6.50 as of current recording. And lastly, we are playing Late to Dinner. This is also a new card from Modern Horizons 2. For 3 and a white, sorcery, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You get to create a food token. The food token itself is not the reason why we're playing it. The reason why we're playing it is the return target creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. It directly going back into the battlefield. That's what we want for 4 mana. Now we're going to be going over a couple of categories that don't have enough cards to justify having their own category. With each category we do, I usually put around 4 cards to be able to safely put this under its own category. Now each one of these is either 3 cards in that category, 2 or 1. We're going to start off with our cantrips. Doomscar, I mentioned to you already, was one of them. The next one is Cosmic Intervention. I've had a long, lengthy discussion about how good this card is, and I still feel this is a really strong card altogether. If a permanent you control would be put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next M step. Now feel free to comment in the comments down below if you feel Cosmic Intervention is not a great card, or if you feel this is a great card, let me know nonetheless. This doesn't just hit your non-land permanents. This is lands too. Any Armageddon or Obliterate style cards, you could just have Cosmos Intervention come in and you're going to be the safest person on the board, getting all your permanents back onto the field. And with that, on your next turn, you're getting all your permanents back on the field. Nobody has any permanents on the field themselves, and you're in a safe position to take control. You also have Foretell in its cost as well. And you get to, and that's the reason why this is part of the cantrips. And like I said, let me know in the comments what you think about Cosmic Intervention. I still think this is an amazing card that should skyrocket in price. And next we are running Mandate of Peace. For 1 and a white, you only cast a spell during combat. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. You get to end the combat phase. This is just an effective, if you're gonna get killed, or if somebody's going to try to kill you that turn, play Mandate of Peace. They can't cast any spells. You end combat. That way they can't do anything for the rest of their turn except activate abilities. We're going to be running through our 3 counter spells. If you don't know what they are at this point in mono white, shame on you, but nonetheless we're going to go through them in rapid speed. We're running Dawn Charm, Lapse of Certainty, and Mana Tithe. So Dawn Charm has the 3 modals where you get to prevent all combat that would be dealt this turn. You get to regenerate a creature, or you counter a spell that targets you. Mostly we're using this to counter a spell or just to fog. The second is Lapse of Certainty, where you get to counter a spell and put it on top of its owner's library. Mana Tithe is just 1 white, counter target spell until its controller pays, unless its controller pays 1. Pretty straightforward for all 3 of these. And yeah, these are the main 3 counter spells in white that most people play. Next, we're going to be going through our tax cards. First is Baird, Steward of Argive, a 2/4 for 2 white, Vigilance. Creatures can attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each one of those creatures. Effectively, this is like Ghostly Prison, which is actually the next card we're going to be talking about. Creatures can attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. Except Baird is only for 1, for Ghostly Prison is 2. And we're also running Windborn Muse, which is also a Ghostly Prison on itself, except for 1 extra mana on a body, having flying, and a 2/3 body itself. Next, we're gonna be going over our stacks cards with Aven Mind Sensor, where your opponent, if your opponent's would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards of that library instead. Getting your opponents to try to fetch out one of their big spells. If they're gonna be tutoring, you play Aven Mind Sensor, and that nullifies them unless it's in the top 4 cards of their library itself. Next, we're running Rule of Law, where each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. This is starting to become a common card in my circle itself, considering how cheap Rule of Law is. It's currently sitting at 30 cents. However, at any point in time, it can also go back up to like $5, $6 itself. But while it's still budget, it remains in this deck. And lastly, we're running Suppression Field. Activated abilities cost 2 more to play unless they're mana abilities. In this deck, there's not too many activated abilities. For the most part, it's just cycling abilities. Other than that, if any one of your opponents has cards that require activated abilities, it's gonna tax them a little bit further. Next, we're gonna be running over our draw spells. Our 2 draw spells mainly is Endless Atlas for 2, tap, draw a card. You only activate this if you control 3 or more lands of the same name. We're running a surplus of planes in this deck, so it should be no problem activating Endless Atlas at any point. And we're running Secret Rendezvous, another new card, this time from Strixhaven. You and target opponent each draw 3 cards. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The next is our protection cards. We are running Glacial Chasm. This is a very odd card, I do agree. There is a combo piece, technically speaking, with this card that is in this deck. But to read it off, cumulative upkeep, you pay 2 life, so every turn you're paying 2 extra life whenever Glacial Chasm comes into play. So first rotation, it's on the field, you pay 2, second, 4, third, 6, and so on and so forth. Whenever Glacial Chasm enters the battlefield, you sacrifice a land. Your creatures you control can't attack, but the most important, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. Now, that is extremely effective. It doesn't stop you from milling out, and it doesn't stop any immediate win effects. However, you can't lose life from Glacial Chasm being on the field. And we're also running 8.5 Tails. This is another innocuous card. However, it's pretty strong when you have enough mana to activate the ability multiple times. For 1 and a white, target permanent you control gains protection from white until end of turn, which is probably going to be the one thing you use a lot of the time. And for 1 generic, target spell or permanent becomes white until end of turn. Solemnity, this is the combo with Glacial Chasm. So how Solemnity works is players can't get counters, and counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. Solemnity, whenever it comes in, technically speaking, Glacial Chasm has age counters attached to this. You wouldn't see that. However, every time you pay the cumulative upkeep cost, you're giving it an age counter to it. And with Solemnity, it can't get those age counters. So basically, as long as Solemnity is out and then you play Glacial Chasm, you don't need to pay that 2 life, and no damage could be dealt to you at all. Our buff card in this deck is All That Glitters. You get to enchant a creature, and enchant creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment you control. So All That Glitters, effectively, as long as you have all your prison style cards out and all your ramp and such and so forth, it's going to get really big on whatever creature you put it on. Another new card that was suggested for this deck is Nettle Cyst. It is the exact same effect as All That Glitters, except it also has Living Weapon, which gives you an extra germ token. However, for this, we're going to be talking about All That Glitters, and it basically gives a giant boost to whatever creature you put it on. Our win con. Approach of the Second Sun. If this spell was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun on top of its owner's library 7th from the top and you gain 7 life. This is to become a modern win con in white. Effectively, you are going to be playing this to gain the 7 life. Try to get it to play it a second time while trying to fend off yourself from either dying or to fend off your opponents from trying to countering approach or make you shuffle your deck altogether. And the last of our extra cards is Selfless Squire. Flash, whenever into the battlefield, you prevent all damage that would be dealt to you, and whatever damage that will be dealt is put on Selfless Squire in the form of +1/+1 counters. Basically, you're getting the fog and boost Selfless Squire all together. And the penultimate category we're going to be talking about is our ramp. Basically, this is going to be all the amount. This is gonna be all the cards we need to get a further ahead and siphon through our deck entirely. We're gonna start off with Boreas Charger. With flying 2/1, whenever it leaves the battlefield, you choose an opponent who controls more lands than you. Search your library for a number of plains cards equal to the difference and reveal them. Put one of them onto the battlefield tapped and the rest into your hand, then shuffle. This is a situational card where if you're the one who has less lands on the field than most of the other players, most of the time in white that's going to be the case. As long as Boreas Charger leaves and your opponents have more lands than you, you get to tutor for all your plains and put it onto the field. Well, one at a time, obviously, but you know. Next is Gift of Estates. It's exactly situational as Boreas Charger. If an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for up to 3 plains or cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. Same idea, same ordeal. Knight of the White Orchid is next. Whenever it comes into play, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search for a plains card, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle. So this one, it allows you to directly put plains onto the battlefield. Kor Cartographer is the same thing, where you get to search for plains and put into the battlefield, but this time it comes into play tapped and shuffle your library. Marble Diamond is one of our many mana rocks in this deck. It comes into play tapped for 2 mana, but it adds a white. Oketra's Monument is one of our Redux cards. It's the only Redux card we have in this deck, and it's the only way we generate tokens, minus Martial Coup. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a white 1/1 white warrior creature token with Vigilance. Most of all, white creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Next, we're running Oresco's Explorer. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for up to X plains cards, where X is the number of players who control more lands than you. Reveal those cards and put them to your hand, then shuffle. Next, we're running Replicating Ring. For 3, you get to play it and add 1 mana of any color. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on it, and when it reaches 8 or more, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicating Ring with the exact same ability to add 1 mana of any color. Next, we're running Thunder Totem. It is effectively another mana rock. You get to tap it for white, but for 1 white, it becomes a 2/2 white spirit artifact creature with flying and first strike until end of turn. So this mana rock can get some wings and it can attack for 2 damage. And lastly is Tooth of Ramos. It is another mana rock where you get to tap and add 1 white mana to your mana pool and sacrifice it to add 1 white mana to your mana pool. And lastly, our land base. This is all the fuel to the engine that we need to get this deck going. We're going to start off with Arch of Araskas, where you get to tap it for a colorless, but if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And for 5 and tap, you get to draw a card as long as you have the City's Blessing. So this is an extra card draw for your deck. We've already touched on Glacial Chasm, and we've already touched on Hall of Helad's Generosity. The only thing with Glacial Chasm, it's not a conventional land where you get to tap for a colorless. However, it is still a very hard card to get rid of on the battlefield itself, and Hall of Helad's Generosity taps for a colorless mana. We're also running Mistveil Plains. It is technically considered a plains. Whenever it enters the battlefield, tap, and for white, tap it, put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Activate this ability only if you control 2 or more white permanents. And lastly, we are running 34 plains. With our $50 budget on this deck, including the commander's price, we are sitting at $56.67, minus the basic land count that we have. We have a total deck of $50.55. We are technically 55 cents over budget. That is extremely doable, especially with the limitations that we set ourselves on with the $5 leniency. Any player can add 50 cents to this deck to make this deck a little bit functional. I've also had the time to tally out a couple of pros and cons to playing this deck. Some of the pros is you're able to lock out your players from playing creatures and non-land permanents with all the prison style effects you have on the field and in your hand and in the deck itself. Have a lot of ramp in white, which is very surprising since white has very little backing, except in the last year it's starting to get a little bit more backing nonetheless. You have enough ways to recruit your stuff back onto the battlefield, with Hall of Helad's Generosity being one of them, Mistveil Plains putting it to the bottom of your library, so on and so forth. And you can block players from actually attacking you with a lot of the cards that we have in this deck. And some of the cons to this, its mono white is its biggest con. Just because it had some support in the last couple of sets does not mean it's gonna shift its power level in terms of like dominant mono-colored decks. Doesn't have enough support to face faster decks than itself. It can easily get blown out as long as your opponents can just get rid of all of your creatures or mass removal. And there's only one win con that is kind of a glass cannon. Even if you only have your 3 counters, even if you have your counter spells, doesn't mean that your opponents can't have some trickery up their sleeves. And some notable upgrades I would say for this deck, considerably, if you have the budget to put it in, would be Smothering Tithe, easily one of the best mono white cards to come out in the last couple of years. Sphere of Safety is also really good, adding to that taxing effect your opponents can't really attack you for. Grant Abolishor allows you to limit the amount of spells your opponents can cast on your turn, and Luminarch Ascension allows you to get some big flyers and some big beaters on the field immediately out. And that's gonna be it for today's video, everybody. Let me know what you think of today's video in the comments down below. And if you like this kind of video, don't forget to give this video a like, share it amongst your friends, and hit subscribe to be notified of every future video that comes out. I post every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and best of all, each one of these videos has a premiere attached to them. So you'll be notified 30 minutes in advance when the next video comes out. Not only do we have the deck list in the show notes, but we also have our socials on there. The Twitter page, Facebook, and Instagram page. Give us all a follow there. That way you're gonna be notified of the next video that's gonna be coming out. And if you feel like reaching out to me, best place to do so is on our socials. That's it for today's video. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly appreciate it. I've been Stefan. This is General Warfare, the channel, and I'll see you guys next Friday. Until then, cheers, everybody.